In today's lesson, we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. As you can see, it's x equals opposite b plus or minus radical b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Now, the point of using the quadratic formula is to find our two solutions, or x values when y equals 1. So just like what we did before when we were finding the discriminant, when the discriminant value, which is seen right here, b squared minus 4 times a times c, right there, when that discriminant was positive, we said it crossed our parabola right here, our graph crossed at 2 points on the x-axis. Well, instead of just saying, there's two real solutions, we're going to go a step farther and find those two real solutions using the quadratic formula. When that discriminant was 0, our graph just touched at 1 point on the x-axis, and that quadratic formula, again, when we plug in our a, b, c, will tell us that actual value where it crosses or touches the x-axis. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Now, if your discriminant, though, is negative, remember that the graph will never touch that x-axis, keeping us from having any real solutions when y equals 0. So just like when we were finding the discriminant, our first step to use this quadratic formula is we need to find our a, b, and c. So what does a equal, what does b equal, and what does c equal? All right. In step 2, all right, we need to find our discriminant. And by finding our discriminant first, this is going to make our quadratic formula a lot easier to use in the long run. So go ahead and find your discriminant second after you found your a, b, and c. That discriminant, again, the general formula for the discriminant is b squared minus 4 times a times c. And just to be able to handle and deal with the negative values, we're going to go ahead and put parentheses around each of our a, b, and c. And if you look in our quadratic formula, you can see under the radical, that's our discriminant, b squared minus 4 times a times c. So we can rewrite our quadratic formula to be x equals opposite b plus or minus radical discriminant. So whatever we find our discriminant to be, we can just plug it right under here now. All over 2 times a. And then our last step, step 3, all we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to plug in our opposite b. We're going to plug in our discriminant under the radical. And then we're also going to plug in our 2 times a value. Simplify everything up, and then we'll have our two solutions. So anytime you see solve for, or find the roots, or find the solutions, or find the x-intercept, or find where the parabola crosses the x-axis, you're going to use the quadratic formula. And essentially, by using the quadratic formula, we're finding out where our parabola crosses that x-axis. So right here, this point and this point are my two real solutions using the quadratic formula. So let's go ahead and look at an example right here. We have ourselves a quadratic equation right here. It must equal 0. For quadratics, to use the quadratic formula, we want our y to be equal to 0 to find out what our two x values are where it crosses the x-axis. So before we can even start, we have to say, does it equal 0? And in this case, yes, it does. So now I can find my a, b, and c. So if we look in front of the x squared, I have 1x squared, so my a value is 1. I don't have any x's, so my b value is going to be 0. And if you look, the number all by itself, that's going to be your c value. So a little refresher there, which is negative 25. Alright, now from there, step 2 said to find the discriminant. Alright, so I go ahead and plug it into that general formula, which is b squared minus 4 times a times c. So I plug in my b, I plug in my a and my c, and I get 100. Alright, so my discriminant is 100. Now that's a positive value, so I know that my parabola is going to go ahead and cross twice on the x-axis. So I'm going to have 2 real solutions, or 2 answers. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this in the quadratic formula. So opposite b, so opposite of 0 is just 0, plus or minus radical discriminant. Now we already found the discriminant, which is b squared minus 4 times a times c. So I'm just going to plug that 100 in already, so I don't have to redo that. So that's kind of nice. That's why we find the discriminant first, so we can plug it right in. All over 2 times my a value. Alright, so now I'm just going to simplify this up and I'll be all done. So we have my plus value, so x is plus or minus 10 over 2. So I have x equals positive 5 and x equals negative 5. So if I look at the graph, at x equals negative 5, that's where my parabola will cross the x-axis, and where x equals positive 5, that's the second real solution of where my parabola or graph crosses the x-axis. Let's look at a second solution, or a second example right here. We got 3b squared minus 9b minus 84 equals 0. So I want to ask myself, does this equal 0? Yes. Alright, so I'm ready to find my a, b, and c. So my a is the number in front of b squared, which is 3. My b is negative 9, the number in front of b. And then the number all by itself, that's my c value, negative 84. Step 2 in the notes, it says to find the discriminant. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my b squared minus 4 times a times c. And you might be asking yourself, is it always minus 4 there? Will that always be there? Yes, because that is part of our discriminant formula. B squared minus 4 times a times c. So my discriminant is 1089. And that's a positive value. So you guessed it. We have 2 real solutions. So I'm going to have 2 answers for x. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that into my quadratic formula. The opposite of b, so I had negative 9 for b, so the opposite of negative 9 is 9, plus or minus radical, and whatever I found for my discriminant, which is 1089, all over 2 times a. Alright, so my next step is, after I plug that all in, is just simplify this up and we're done. So I have the square root of 1089, that's a perfect square, of 33. So I have x equals 9 plus or minus 33, because the square root of 1089 is 33, so I'm just simplifying here. All over 2 times 3 is 6. Alright, now I can separate my 2 answers. I'm going to have one answer for the plus and one answer for the minus. So I have x equals 9 plus 33 over 6, and I have x equals 9 minus 33 over 6. So if you have trouble with these fractions, and if you want to just use your graphing calculator, you can hit alpha, which is that green button, and then y equals. And that'll give you the numerator over the denominator, and you can plug in these numbers right into the calculator as you see them, and you'll get 7 for one value and negative 4 for another. If we look at the graph here, you can see that one of our real solutions being 7, that's where the parabola will cross the x-axis. And then our other solution, negative 4, that's the second spot or point of where our parabola crosses the x-axis. So there's our two real solutions that our discriminant predicted we would have. Lastly, it's good to have the quadratic formula memorized because you never know when you're going to need it, especially with the ACT and college classes. So one way to help me memorize it is I used a little jingle, a little song. So I sing it like this: x equals opposite b plus or minus radical b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you just practice that any way you need to remember that formula, so that way you always have it with you. All right, good luck.